Jim Joyce.
Eugene, Wednesday.
It is. It is.
It is. I see you've done a lot with your background.
Yeah. I keep switching. It depends on like when the dinner is and are we ordering or are we cooking? And then I'm kind of being shuffled around from my podcast studio, aka kitchen.
Right.
Which, by the way, before we get really cracking.
Yep.
And maybe while I'm pouring today is cognac. If you want to maybe text our guest, because he's still not in the waiting room, so we're going to shame him, but that's okay. Maybe a couple of things. So first of all, I don't know if you've heard of this. I just heard about it the other day. The All In podcast. Have you heard of this? It's with Chamath, Jason Calacanis, David Sachs, David Friedberg. Apparently, so they are our competition, I think, because it's a gang of them just chatting a bunch of different tech stuff and SPACs and
I've listened to it. That's like the famous dudes, like the and Calacanis.
That's it. So I don't know. I really enjoyed listening to it. All things aside, it was a good riff.
And
they just riff. Kind of like you and I, and when the guests join. But maybe two other things. Just I don't know if you read Kevin O'Leary's Health Tech Reads. It's a newsletter. So he just broke down the whole like Oscar Health S1.
Okay.
And the one thing I took out of it, holy crap, 1.4 billion deficit. And I think last year lost another 400 million. And so the question becomes, what does it really take and, to scale and become profitable? And then on the SPAC side, I also saw Andy Mychkovsky. I hope I pronounced him right, because I think he's from similar country. He tweeted something, 58 SPACs, health SPACs specifically, are without any targets.
58, yeah, that's like it's in the number, the capital, someone quoted the capital too. It's off the charts, right? Like looking for different targets. So where would they find a Your Coach or a Health Beacon or the Price is Right?
Not quite there yet. I don't know. We're just actually just talking to Bill Taranto about the whole SPAC, and I gave my 2 cents. Well, it's if it's the right time for the right company and the right assets, and just like with everything else, it depends.
Well, I love it. So Jeff should be here now, right? I can text you.
Yes. And maybe why don't you do as I'm letting Jeff in?
Yeah. So Jeff. So we have Jeff Berkowitz, and we'll let him do the proper introduction. But him and I are, like a lot of my pharma colleagues, had come from an organization that no longer exists called Schering-Plough Pharmaceuticals that was taken over by Merck. And here he is, Jeff Berkowitz.
Look at you guys.
How are you doing, sir? Looking slim. I like the beard.
I actually trimmed it for you. I had the whole coronavirus Grizzly Adams thing going.
Hold on.
Looking good. I was just about to go through all of our kind of life or tangential journey together, Jeff. I was just going on that road of how we know each other.
Get cracking, and then go for it.
It's one of those remarkable things. First off, I just want to say you guys must be really scraping the bottom of the barrel if you got to me.
No, we're saving the best for last. Actually, Jim, I just thought about this. This is our final episode of season 4.
Right.
I think.
I've been binging the whole thing too, so this is like the big.
This is like the heavy hitter. I have to say, like, so for people that maybe, so we have Jeff Berkowitz. So I think of I think of you in lots of different lights, Jeff. But you for me, you started off as like the most sensible, logical, balanced executive with a legal background. That's what you're known for inside Schering-Plough. And that seemed to like that kind of like training then got you into major senior roles through Schering-Plough, then onto Merck, and then onto Walgreens, and then onto Optum, and now you've started your own thing. And I think, and then I heard recently, I didn't know this, but you're among other boards that you sit on, you're sitting on an Irish board that we both have in common. But so I'll let you introduce yourself properly.
I was going to say, Jim, okay, Jeff, don't let him write your biography, okay?
Look, I've been called a lot worse, so I have lots of dirty little secrets. So some people don't even think of me as a lawyer. That's definitely an old time Schering-Plough thing to have that lawyer.
Yeah.
So it's funny. And I'm also breaking my cardinal rule because I usually don't like to be, pictured next to somebody with really good hair. But you guys,
you have no worries here, so
yeah, that's why I like Zoom, because I don't know what you guys see, but I get the yeah.
Yeah, no, you're long beyond being an attorney. Like and I've never had a bad conversation with you from that regard. I don't know if you share the same.
So,
of course.
So maybe just before, Jeff, you go through a little bit of like your background for our millions of listeners and viewers. A little fact also, when Jim and I were chatting and he's like, oh, Jeff Berkowitz. I'm like, Jeff Berkowitz? I know Jeff Berkowitz. Yes, we've crossed paths as I was doing the stint at Metco and you were doing the Walgreens thing. And then this summer, basically Jim kind of reconnected us and we had an awesome Zoom call. Your hair was in the wind. I remember that. So just anyway. Just small world.
Yes, maybe properly introduce yourself. And I know you're well beyond being the days I knew you 20 years ago.
Yeah, Jim, it's funny. I was excited to talk to you guys. I think what you're doing is really cool and fun. I feel I'm very old, but I feel young doing a podcast. I told my daughter I was doing a podcast, and she's like, "Wow, I don't think she was thinking of this." But no, thanks for including me. But it's funny. All roads lead to Schering-Plough. There are some companies that just have this legacy, and people have an affinity to, and it certainly actually helped me throughout my career as well. That just network that formed from Schering-Plough and people like you, Jim. It's just amazing to see the amount of success. I call it, if I'm pronouncing the word correct, the Schering-Plough diaspora, where people just sort of went everywhere. So it's funny. We have a saying here where I'll connect with somebody or network with somebody, and people get so sick of me they'll say, "How do you know that person?" I was like, "Oh, we work together at Schering-Plough," and they're like, "How can it be that everybody?"
It's like the PayPal mafia of pharma, right?
It was really funny. You can have Walgreens Boots Alliance with the COO of Walgreens Boots Alliance, who's this very prolific, very well-known person. We were at JP Morgan one time, and she has an Italian accent. What is with this Schering-Plough? Like everybody worked at, and I think in that instance, we were meeting with Paul Hudson, for example, who
awesome. Schering-Plough guy. There's a lot of them.
But in terms of me, I can keep it similar. You guys can take it wherever you want. But Jim, that is depending on who I talk to, my dirty little secret is I'm a lawyer. Sometimes it's that I work at an insurance company. It depends. But I really, from New York, put myself through college and law school, and was in private practice at a large firm in New York doing healthcare law, and got this weird call from Schering-Plough that said it was interviewing. I don't even think I told my wife about it. And I went and interviewed with somebody who is now the general counsel of Regeneron, speaking of really successful people. Joe LaRosa.
Joe.
But I went in to Schering-Plough as Roch Doliveux's lawyer. And I still to this day remember his number and everything, because when it came up on your screen, like everything froze and you were very, very concerned. But I didn't know anything about being an in-house counsel, and they needed healthcare lawyers to do the managed care contracting and things like that. And those were the days where I tell my son, it doesn't happen anymore, where you're offered a job on the spot. Like went in, interviewed, and somebody came out and said, "When can you start?" and gave me like an offer letter. And to your point, Joe, I worked in the law department for actually almost 4 years as a lawyer. So really practiced law for 10 years and had this really crazy contract negotiation with somebody who I was supporting, a guy named Angelos Papadimitriou, who's still very much a mentor of mine. He just had become the CEO of Pirelli Tires, actually.
Okay. Oh, did he? I haven't seen Angelos and heard from him ages.
Amazing. And now our kids are going to go to Northwestern together, which is also crazy. When I started, I didn't even have, barely had kids. But we were on a contract negotiation at Humana. Our flight got canceled, and we ended up having dinner together. I hadn't known him that well. I was the lawyer helping just close out on the contract. had this fabulous dinner together, and literally called me into his office the next day with him and Roch and said, you should be on the business side, you know, and not be a lawyer. You've got a commercial mindset. And I had never even thought about it. I put myself through law school. I'm married to a lawyer. I went to the general counsel at Schering-Plough. I don't know if you remember Joe Connors. And he said, you will be a failure. Don't do it. If you go over, you're dead to me. It was like the craziest. You would never do that as a leader. You would be proud that the business side wanted somebody, right? And he said, you know, you're dead to me. Don't come back. And I went over. This is like right after 9/11. I had this really goofy title, like Senior Director of Managed Care Operations, which I had no idea.
I remember. I think I was running your budgets. I was running your budget.
Honestly, I still can't believe Jim ran budgets. Like, I don't know why. I still can't believe it.
Yeah, or that somehow I was in charge of a budget is even.
Actually, it was Debbie. It wasn't me. I don't want to offend Debbie. It was Debbie and Linda.
And there's a great example. You know, again, people that I've known for almost 25 years. Debbie Kane still. Jim's talking about probably one of the foremost minds in government pricing and rebating and contracting, who was my finance support still. A very good friend, and also went on to like incredible success now at Allergan, or what is now AbbVie. But so I moved over and ended up working for Roch and Angelos, and within 2 weeks I never looked back. I realized, never even thought about, was this a mistake, was it? And the crazy part about that is that literally 3 months later, 6 months later, all hell broke loose. So here I have no credibility. I move over from being a lawyer to the business side, and literally Pharmacia sells to Pfizer. Fred Hassan comes in as CEO. We're under a consent decree and a corporate integrity agreement, and literally they come and wipe, wipe off the face of the earth all of the, you could say words like legacy, Schering-Plough people in those days, and all of a sudden I find myself in Fred Hassan and Carrie's office saying, you don't know me from a hole in the wall, but and I'm a lawyer that just moved over to the business side, but I promise you I can do this job. And I was interviewing for my own job, basically. And I remember being at a meeting in San Francisco speaking, and I saw my phone ring, and it was Fred or Carrie or somebody. I called my wife first, said, don't spend any money. I'm getting fired right now. and they offered me, they offered me my own position. Imagine, I still credit.
That's because you had a good budget guy.
Yeah, I actually credit the guy who was the VP of market access at Pharmacia, because he didn't come to Schering, and had he come, I would have been out of a job. But he
right. So those names you were tossing around there. So there's Roch Doliveux, was a famous guy. So he went on to be CEO of UCB, and then Pierre Fabre in between or something, and then there was. Carrie Cox, who's like chairman of a kind of a Merck spinoff now.
Oh, she does that. So she's just become, talk about going full circle. At Schering-Plough in 2007, we ended up buying Organon. I even spent like 6 months in OS going over, the market access issues and things like that. And then obviously, Merck bought Schering-Plough, and Carrie left. And this is well over a decade ago, right? This 2007. Now, full circle, Merck is divesting sort of the women's health and other components of that portfolio, and Carrie's coming back in as chairman of that organization. But she's incredible. I mean, she's an incredible mentor. So she's on the board of Cardinal and Texas Instruments, and she was on the board of Celgene and had founded a regeneration business called Humacyte. So just has done prolific work since leaving.
Yeah. So this is like I'm flying through the past here now. So go ahead, Eugene.
No, I was going to say, because I also know you spent some time at United Health Group, which is completely, it's a beast. I just read Brian Dolan's whole report on United Health Group and the 500 boats going at the same. I'm sure it's different now, 4 years later. No, sorry. Yeah, 4 years later? I don't know. When were you at United?
I left in the summer of 2017. So I left Walgreens. So I left Schering. So I ended up staying, when I ended up getting the job. And one of the things I'm probably the most proud of is I was this legacy guy that Fred Hassan, CEO, didn't know. And I ended up basically, and I ended up becoming really a part of their team. And so I ended up running market access globally. And that was really one of the other game changers of that team, is that, market access was really just a US centered thing or a country level thing. And we really saw an opportunity to kick it up a couple notches. This is when the pendulum was swinging in the industry from the power of the pen to the power of the payer. And we went to senior management as a team and said, look, there's a global business here. People are calling us from all over the world saying, how do you speak about the value of, Jim, you'll have to say, Nasonex or Asthmax or Clarinex, to an audience. And we went to the management and said, you should develop a global organization. I think we really became the first and best in class global organization focused on market access. Still probably one of the best jobs I'll ever have, because you really got this global perspective of things. And then obviously fast forward, we had the joint venture with Merck around the cardiovascular franchise. And then I was one of the few people that went over to Merck in the acquisition of Schering-Plough to report to Ken and create the global market access division for the combined organization.
But Jeff, I would argue that your legal background helped a shitload with market access. Or I don't know.
I think it's helped. Honestly, I think it's been a good foundation for everything that I've done, and mostly because not and I wasn't a great legal mind by any stretch of the imagination. I think at Schering, to Jim's initial point is, I started getting really engaged in the business and trying to figure out, the easiest thing as a lawyer is to say no, and that's the path of least resistance. And now I work with lots of pharma companies, and things literally stall and die in the law departments with no reason, no rhyme or reason, where I always tried to say, that's going to be a challenge, but did you think about doing it this way and trying to find a path forward? And I think that's ultimately what led to the shift to the business side, because I just really ended up wanting to be more accountable for the decisions that I was making. But more than anything, EJ, I think was just the learning how to ask questions and ask those follow-up questions and sort of be able to analyze the answers that you're getting in the data, and then being able to make decisions.
But what a buzzy, just like, what a buzzy atmosphere and a flow, and people, being drawn in at that time when you were moving from, Schering-Plough into the, Pharmacia team, to the Merck team, to it was just flowing. So it was in like the number one issue for all these programs, and we can, go into digital health here. The number one issues is like, can you do it? Can you legally, is there, I feel like that's such an essential thing to any pharmaceutical commercial strategy, right?
Yeah. And of course, Schering was really under the gun, right? Because we had this corporate integrity agreement and consent decree. People were so paralyzed. But those are some of the best friends I made in the industry, were the business guys that I was helping, during the law department. And then for me, the real mindset game changer for me was making the shift from Merck to Walgreens. People thought I was nuts. They were like, you're going to leave Merck. You've been here for 13 years. You're working for Ken. You've built up this division in market access, and you're going to join this Midwestern pharmacy chain in Chicago, where you don't know anybody, you don't know the business. And I actually thought I knew everything.
This little tiny chain.
But in many ways, it really was considered at that time a Midwestern pharmacy. Even though they were a Fortune top 30 company and and literally 5 years later when I left, everybody was like, how did you know to join Walgreens when you did? I have no idea why. It was totally.
It must have been your legal background. No.
No.
No, I'm kidding.
I had no intention of going, Fred, one of the things that Fred Hassan had said to me as a mentor was, it sounds funny, but he said, when you get a chance to meet with a Fortune top 30 CEO, you do it, you go. I had no intention of going to Chicago or going to Walgreens, and I had a scheduled 30-minute coffee with Greg Lawson, who was the CEO of Walgreens, and it turned into literally a 2.5 hour, 3 hour whiteboarding session. He called in the CFO, he called in the head of strategy, and one thing led to the other. So in the summer of 2010, I joined Walgreens, and again, I feel like part of how I lucked into some of these roles where it's sort of this combination of, I've had these two weird things. I've always either been the outsider looking in. So like I was a lawyer who went in-house, and then I was the the law department guy who joined the business side, and then I was the Schering-Plough guy that joined Merck, and then I was the pharma guy that joined Walgreens. And then also, the other second part of that is maybe this sort of willingness to take calculated risks that other people may not have taken. Like Joe Connor's saying, why would you leave the law department?
You're dead to me. You're dead to me. Do you remember, I tell one story, I tell a lot. I tell when we were trying to figure out the fair market value stuff, Eugene, inside, all the regulations were coming after, and Jeff, one of the top executives, Jeff Berkowitz, is put on this task force, and they needed to, and then, so he assembles the greatest minds inside Schering-Plough to tackle this really significant challenge. And then they put a junior finance guy, on the committee just to help balance the books. And that was me, right? So it was a junior finance guy. And
like a value committee. Wow.
So, I tell a story where all these powerful people, and Eugene, you appreciate this knowing me. So there's a meeting going on, and they're all constrained, right? I hear this constrained. They're like, Jim, aren't you supposed to do that meeting? So they're having a financing problem, and you're not at the meeting. So someone tells, so I get down there. So I rock into the meeting 10 minutes late to the meeting of all these top executives, and Jeff's running the committee, and he's just like, gonna take a long time to get this through, budgets and approvals and everything's so, locked down right now. And I kind of rock in, kind of saying, well, how much is the invoice for? And you're like, 50 grand. I'm like, well, just give it to me. Just give it to me.
I thought, Jim, you'd told a joke or something, and that got things moving. And that's what
I was like, just give me the invoice.
But that was the type of action orientation that I think mattered in those days. Somebody actually, have the courage to walk into a group of people and get stuff done. And I actually think that was sort of very much a Schering-Plough sort of cultural thing.
Right.
The entrepreneurial.
So take us oh, sorry, go ahead, Eugene.
Yeah, no, I was going to actually jump to, because you kind of got into the Walgreens thing. And I know we met when I think I just came over there, Don Sherman, I think even Brian Griffin, many others, the Metco crew. And we sort of crossed paths, I think, when you were traveling back and forth to Europe, right? So even London, if I'm not mistaken. The Walgreens Boots Alliance, I haven't kept up. Is that still alive and well? I know it's been 10 years also,
it's become this
is it just
megalithic, massive organization. So when I joined, again, it's funny, it must be me, but when I joined Walgreens, again, all hell broke loose within 3 months. There were three sort of big things that happened. We had this big dust up with Express Scripts, which is, one of the 3 large pharmacy benefit management companies, which is absolutely critical to how Walgreens would do business, because they create networks and the bolus of people like you and me that would go in to get our prescriptions filled. And we had a major contract blow up with them that could have fundamentally changed the value of that. Very public, front page of the Wall Street Journal.
I actually remember that. Yeah.
And that's actually how we, ultimately had to sort of rethink strategy and start thinking about potential other opportunities for the company, which is how we ended up in dialogue with Alliance Boots. And in the summer of 2012, we ended up taking a 45%, Walgreens ended up taking a 45% ownership in Alliance Boots with the right to buy the other 55%. And we were setting up a 50-50 joint venture to really bring together and share with the public and the business community what would be the value proposition of bringing a US retailer and a European retailer, as well as a drug distributor, together. And there are a whole bunch of other, I will absolutely write a book about it. It was fascinating.
You had the world famous Stefanos, right?
What I didn't realize is, when we did the deal, all of a sudden we're in a conference room in Walgreens, and we realized, as we set up the joint venture, as part of the setting it up and making sure you got the benefit of the tax situations and things like that, you needed to set up an entity where you had a certain level of executive on the ground in Switzerland, and again, an opportunity that I thought I had missed completely, having not been able to do it at Schering. And again, everybody thought I was nuts for joining this Midwestern pharmacy chain in Chicago, and all of a sudden I find myself
in Switzerland.
Nobody would ever believe that, and people probably wouldn't have done it either, especially with
and that, I think that's when we reconnected, because you were responsible for obviously that JV and that business, and then and I said, why don't you come over to Ireland, because we were hosting something with the Prime Minister. Actually, something with the Prime Minister of Ireland. But the who we were hosting it with, Eugene, was Martin Kelly was running a Health Excel event. Isn't that too funny?
I figured that's where it ended up.
It's one of the, like Ireland's a little bit different. You can actually meet the Prime Minister, right? You can actually have a conversation, and
how
you
do
came
you
over.
the word? It's Taoiseach, or how do you?
Taoiseach, correct? Yeah, yeah.
I have a picture of me, you, and the Taoiseach in my office somewhere, because
and that was Enda Kenny, who's it was a great Taoiseach.
So it was another Marty party. He tweeted that the other day. Marty party.
I think, Jeff, and correct me to connect the dots. That's what you also met Jer Rabbit, who's the CEO of Unifar, who had just bought my company.
Yeah, so I actually moved. I moved with my family, to Switzerland in 2012, and really to set up the joint venture between Walgreens and Alliance Boots. And to answer your question, Eugene, they eventually, over a 3-year period of time, we bought the other, Walgreens bought the other 55% and consummated the relationship. So I spent 3 years there, and the idea was setting up the global value proposition, speaking back to pharmaceutical organizations about what Walgreens and Boots represented on a global scale. And we were spending a lot of time in different geographies talking about that, meeting with different pharma companies and different potential players in Eugene. That's where I think we were having conversations with Medco. And then Dawn Sherman went over to Teva, and we had conversations with her at Teva because we became the biggest buyer of generic drugs, and sort of changed the way generics were procured on a global basis. That was one of the big pieces of the Walgreens Boots Alliance development joint venture. And so, and then obviously we were meeting with lots of wholesalers. So I had met Jer Rabbit at Unifar through that, and we just kept in touch over the years. And then, that came full circle as well.
So there's so many areas. I love your perspective on, I mean, we could talk to you a lot about all that. It seems like you're kind of like it's a kind of Forrest Gump moments, history, right? Like but you've seen everything. It's like, okay, there's a big deal being signed, and Jeff is there, either running the deal, obviously not in the Forrest Gump sense, but the what's like when you look at internationalization right now, when you look at like what's your take? Like, I always think that your perspective on implementing how pharmaceutical companies are run, market to market and globally. Like, what's your takeaway in terms of how they're run in these different jurisdictions? Maybe just start there.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I probably have a little bit more of a specific lens, especially around the pricing and reimbursement and market access stuff. But I think, for me, especially having, and I'm so jealous of you guys living in Europe. I got to do it for 3 years, but I wish it was a lot.
Come on over.
But the joint venture shut down, and it was time to go.
I think Real Endpoints needs an office somewhere in Europe. I mean,
I absolutely agree. And Eugene, really jealous of your adventure in Barcelona, and watch you Instagram all over the place. Sitting in New Jersey, 30 inches of snow. But I think for me, having operated globally, which has been really important to me, it's the stuff that I've really liked, bringing all of those different cultures together. I think for me, one of the real benchmarks there is actually trying to simplify and focus on the commonalities versus the differences between the cultures. And this is really, I learned through the global market access piece in particular, because when you're talking about the value of a pharmaceutical product, one of the things that I learned is that if you're talking to HERA in South Korea, or the Australian drug authorities, or Humana in Louisville, Kentucky, or a government in Argentina, 60, 70, 80% of the value proposition of a therapeutic in a disease state is going to be the same. I think in pharma, it was a real battle, because every country likes to complicate. Oh, the US, you guys have totally screwed that up. It's so complicated. It's so fragmented. You've got all these issues. Right. In Europe, he's got, well, you don't understand the Czech Republic because of this, and this. And I would always say, there are those local level nuances, but the commonalities are more apparent and abundant than the nuances. So let's focus on what is the broader global value proposition. That's how, as I talk about setting up the global market access organization, that was really the focus. And I remember you made, I don't know if you remember Bruno Cugini or Francesco Granata that ran Europe and Eastern Europe for Schering-Plough. But when we created the Global Market Access Organization, they were pissed. They were like, nobody's going to tell me what to do in my country, what price to have. And then we really just started showing the value of doing that, the value of creating a value proposition that then can be pulled through at the country level. And now Bruno's, one of my closest friends, and when he thought I would never be successful. I think the other
but isn't it always, I mean, if you look at, US, the federal versus state, I mean, it's the global versus local, right? You don't know our jurisdiction, you don't know the regulations. And to your point, you got to chip away, showing value, right? One way or the other.
And you have to, I think, Eugene, that you said it perfectly, chip away and show value and roll up your sleeves and learn and not come in like a bulldozer. I think ultimately that's how I ended up on the board of Lundbeck, for example, is that, here's a company that's, Danish in origin, but global, a very important percentage of their sales is coming from the US. They didn't have a US for, somebody that knew the US on the board, but they didn't want somebody that would just come in and steamroll and say, you don't understand. They wanted somebody that had a global perspective that could help articulate what was going on, but in a way that everybody could really understand. And then just one more point on yours. One of the things that I struggle with global pharma is that, this country level, and I see it all the time because I see all these pharma companies now, which is really interesting. It's just the amount of resources that large pharma has that are stepping all over each other still to this day, that are completely siloed and where one hand doesn't know what the other's doing, yet they're so protective of what they're doing. So you have a global market access organization, then a Czech Republic market access organization, and a US market access organization. Nobody wants to either share information, or then you have an oncology group that thinks they make the decision. So there's still a lot of inefficiency.
But, I would say a lot of this, I feel like stems from, the senior leadership and how the budgets are allocated, because there's always swings constantly, right? The budgets go to global and allocated. No, let's distribute the budgets to the local, and it's bottoms up. And it flows, and therefore the protectionism kicks in on where the budgets are. I mean, this is my 2 cents on it. I just feel like follow the money, really.
So I want to throw 2 questions at you. So there's this awesome series that I think was it called Digital Therapeutics? What's the name of your series, Eugene? Your podcast series. So he's doing another podcast.
Digital Health Today with Eugene Berkowitz, a Digital Therapeutics edition.
Excellent. But so Eugene's unpacking digital therapeutics. So kind of right off the bat, so when I'm thinking about digital therapeutics, and as a company that, where, maybe part of our portfolio could be considered a therapeutic, and others kind of core infrastructure for injectable medications like Health Beacon. But do you think what's the reimbursement landscape? Just take a kind of a global lens on these digital therapeutics. What do you think this, how do you think that's going to play out? And are you watching it? Or you're saying, how do you make that case for reimbursement for those types of products?
Yeah. First, Jim, congratulations on everything with Health Beacon. You've done a phenomenal job with that company and everything that you've done. And I watched that closely as well. It's very cool.
And he's still managing the budget. No, not up until recently, right? That's been,
Is that right? But so the digital therapeutics question is a great one. So I'm a believer, and there are naysayers. I think it's early days. I've been providing advice to one of the digital therapeutics companies, and you guys are probably even closer to the bleeding edge and cutting edge than I am on this stuff. But I've got to believe that there is a way to integrate traditional therapeutics and RX products with digital, whether it's app-based, especially the way that people behave today with their phones and surrounding themselves with digital surround sound. I've got to believe that there is a way to integrate the two to create a better outcome together. I think the question is, some of the questions that I see are, does that mean that it needs to be solely consumer facing, which some people believe? I get a little challenged with that piece of it because I think sometimes it gets boxed into more of the behavioral health type issues like, Calm or Headspace or smoking cessation and things like that. And I think to tie it to your question on a reimbursement pathway, I think whether it's, governments and or, large commercial payers in the US, it's going to be harder to wrap their minds around just digital for digital's sake and consumer focused. And I think that also undermines the value and the price. I saw this at United Health Group where the behavioral health business is really hard because a lot of things get pushed into that and it becomes sort of a employer product and you can't really value each individual piece. So my bias right now in the early stages is that where digital therapeutics really has an opportunity and a role to play where they can also achieve robust reimbursement pathways is actually being earnest and disciplined about the regulatory pathway, not unlike what you see in pharma, where payers then can hang their hats on a regulatory framework that they are used to. And people disagree with me, by the way. So, and Eugene, maybe you do as well. But that's sort of where I'm hoping that they can both come together. I think the challenge there is, can you create a digital platform that is either agnostic to products and therapeutic classes, or do you have to partner with an individual pharma company, which then gets into all the issues around a pharma company only cares about their product and their class versus the broader issues around digital therapeutics.
So I'm going to honestly save my thoughts for the last episode that I'm going to do with Brian Dolan after the, the limited series expires and my thoughts on it. But I guess, there's a number of ways you can cut it, right? Because if we put it very simplistically, the DTX can be a standalone. And I still think that the FDA route and, you can get it prescribed, but it also is a huge benefit if you go OTC, right? Even if you have the FDA approval. So I don't think one versus the other. The second piece, and this is where to me, it really connects with the pharma, is this, like, let's call it a digital companion for lack of a better, any other word. It's the drug plus, right? And that's where I actually think pharma is struggling the most, because those type of personalities, knowledge, one from a tech perspective, and I've actually heard anecdotes, including in the market access perspective, to say, hey, if we sit in front of this regulatory body negotiating and we say we're going to bring in a device or a companion, well, but they might say that our drug molecule does not work well enough by itself. And so some of those questions start, like, the skepticism around it. So that's where I'd love to get some 2 cents on. That's the middle one.
Right. Also, I'm like to wondering too, just like building on Eugene's, like global, like even I remember listening to you, we were talking, Jeff, when we caught up the other day, and you talked about how patient services are kind of very uncreative and kind of, we'll say, underdeveloped in the US, and whereas in Europe, there might be a lot of reliance on organizations to develop patient services, but you never see, like, I think if you go to a Boston biotech company, or kind of not a big global pharma, but maybe a good sized company, they don't think international until, and when they think international, it's UK or Germany, maybe, or maybe if there's some history. So there's, and it makes sense, like the biggest markets are the US or Germany or maybe Japan or something, right? So everything else becomes distributor, or they don't even pursue it. So it's the big global pharmaceutical companies that have created this global distribution of medicines. Like, it's these like top 20 or so companies that have created this consistency. You can get the same Sanofi medication, the same Novartis or Pfizer medication in a pretty similar way, to your point. But the digital therapeutics companies, are they going to go attack like 50 markets, at the same time? Or are we going to have this hodgepodge?
Yeah, I don't know. I think you both raise good points, Eugene, particularly interesting on this idea of, will my product be considered efficacious if it needs a digital therapeutic to support it, and whether or not we can get more specific on a country level basis. Jim, I actually think that in some ways the digital therapeutic companies are behaving, in the patterns that we see on the pharma side. So I don't see them thinking about sort of personalizing things on a country by country basis. That being said, there are, you know, digital therapeutic companies that are, you know, popping up at a country level as well. But I think they do have this broader vision. I guess I would say this, Eugene, particularly to your point, is that I do think there are tailwinds, continued tailwinds. I know we've talked about compliance and adherence and outcomes of products, you know, for 2 decades now, and it really hasn't come to fruition. But particularly as even in the US here, where you're starting to get this vertical and horizontal integration of healthcare players like insurance companies and pharmacy benefit managers, they will start being able to better drive holistic care, which should lead to a better outcome at a potential lower cost. And these types of measurement capabilities that a digital therapeutic might bring to bear should help drive some of that. And in fact, not be the enemy of a company being concerned about how their perception of their efficacy will be, but should be the friend of the pharma company by showing that the product actually does work, and allow for a platform for a pharma company to be able to, with comfort, go at risk for the potential outcome of their product.
So question for you. I just got a text from Dawn Sherman, and she had, that's so weird. Sorry.
I think so.
No, it just, she didn't know we're talking. So just craziness. But for me, the whole, the package piece is one thing, right? And I just sort of loop it back. Like, if you now have an asset, and by the way, Jim, I think to your point, some of the companies will go. I mean, if I look at like Akili, they're for the most part are basically saying, you know, hey, pharma, we're building out our own distribution, all of that. You know, you got the funding, you got Click, right? David, they're partnering up with pharma with their distribution, and look at the BI deal. It looks exactly like a biotech or biopharma deal. I mean, so right. I think we'll have variety, just like with everything else. I hate saying it, it depends, but it does.
No, and I think people aren't sure what the right model is there. And I think right now, payers, to your original point, Jim, I think payers just are unsure right now. So they're not sure what way. Right. So they're sort of protecting their turf and trying to figure it out. So like Express Scripts here in the United States, one of the 3 large pharmacy benefit managers, has created a digital formulary. I think they're not quite sure what to do with it, but it allows them to sort of get ahead of the issue. I think the other important piece that I didn't want to gloss over, Jim, that you mentioned, is just the whole patient services piece. I think one of the challenges that the pharma industry has today is because we've had this significant price pressure everywhere, including in the US, pharma has gone after ever more rare and orphan diseases and oncology products where they think there is limited competition and more and less price pressure. And so we've gone after, you know, more esoteric and smaller diseases and populations where we think we can charge whatever we want. And then one of the implications of that is, what patient services do you have to wrap around them? They're complex therapies, they have complex distribution. And so there is this whole world that's, you know, growing, you know, everywhere around wraparound services, patient services. And I do think that is going to be an important part of pharma.
You know, are you guys familiar with the Amalgam RX, Chris Bergstrom, right? I mean, if you look at their website, I mean, they're DTX, but they also have patient support. And I've been saying this for years. Like, to me, the novel DTX companies can, quote unquote, replace some of the patient support programs all around. I think, Jim, you and I have spoken about this, and that consolidation. Hey, listen, you know what? There's a lot of SPACs that can just merge a bunch of this. It's all good, man.
Yeah, no, I think there's too, like the idea, like, you know, what type of patient services do you need if you have, you know, if you have like a, you know, a health coach and a, you know, engaging companion app and, you know, some type of monitoring device, or, you know, and you have all that data. So you don't need the, you know, the call center, you know, kind of nurse coming to your home support, you know, perhaps useful, but not, you know, not the only kind of show in town. Now the digital therapeutic could replace patient services. And the rare disease stuff, I mean, that is just like, it's only, it seems like a lot of the work we're getting asked to do is in rare disease. And it seems like there's a lot of like independent units. I don't know, are you seeing that, like independent initiatives to support those therapeutic areas?
Yeah, I think that's also one of the challenges. It's sort of like the digital therapeutics question. It's this question of, does a platform act as an agnostic player to support all pharma companies, or does everything need to be individually catered to a particular product, which is definitely the pharmaceutical industry's perspective, because they don't want anybody to support a competitor. So I think that's the challenge. I think there's, and people might differ, I think there will be a day of reckoning around all of these rare and orphan disease products. Everybody talks about Zolgensma or Luxturna and the $2 million therapies, and the fact that right now they're being reimbursed throughout systems. I think that's fine when there are 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, but as there are 30, 40, 50, 60, it's going to be very much harder to have payers be able to support that. The other thing is, I think competition is coming. So right now, even in oncology right now, we're seeing payers in the US do unprecedented things where they would never touch oncology and never remove a product from their coverage or formulary. They're feeling more and more comfortable. So as you see this race to PD-1s with different, specific indications in cancer, as there's more competition, payers will feel more comfortable making choices and carving out, component parts.
So I'm going to be the timekeeper. We're sort of getting to the top of the hour, and I actually sort of looping that back, but also, I see the logo behind you, Real Endpoints. I actually, to be honest, I haven't even checked out what is it that you do, but I know obviously with pharma. And do you get asked a lot of these questions that we were discussing? Kind of maybe give a little pitch.
I'm
of
glad
Real
my
Endpoints.
Background worked.
It was perfect.
Again, after 2 decades or 2.5 decades of doing this stuff, and having been, in large pharma, retail pharmacy, specialty, and then we didn't talk about, but then spent time at United Health Group on the payer side. Really, one of my big takeaways is, still the massive disconnects that exist within the verticals of healthcare, and in particularly getting acute with pharma, right? In the US in particular, you have insurance companies and pharmacy benefit managers and specialty pharmacies all starting to cooperate and vertically integrate, but pharma is still way over here, still to the points that we've made, still just doing their R&D, not having conversations with the rest of the ecosystem, and hoping that they can put out a rare and orphan product that they can get a high price for. And so my sole focus coming out of that is to try to help biotech companies and pharmaceutical companies really re-engage and plug back into the system to fill some of these gaps, whether that's figuring out how to be more innovative in the way you contract, whether it's figuring out, Jim, to the questions you asked on specialty distribution, how do you go to market and distribute a product in a different way? How do you capture the value of a product either through a pricing strategy or a payer engagement strategy? And you'd be shocked at still how many pharma companies really don't understand or have intellectualized what's going on in the external market around them. It seems remarkable to have this conversation in 2021. It feels very similar, Jim, to the conversations we were having, in the early mid 2000s at Schering-Plough with fair market value and those kinds of things. The conversation at the C-suites of pharma just hasn't changed that much. And it's particularly acute in biotech, where you've got a scientific founder that thinks, man, my product's incredible. Don't call my baby ugly. Everybody's going to pay for it. And then they get hit over the head with a shovel when they have this, failed commercial launch.
Are you seeing, I don't know if I don't want to disclose, but are you thinking about so you have the services and all this expert advice from your company, but also like a technology layer to make that more efficient? Or
yeah, so one of the big, obviously one of the big areas, I think it also touches what we talked about, which is, I also believe there are a lot of tailwinds on this idea that pharma is going to have to plug into that consolidating ecosystem, both in globally and in the US, and be willing for the value that their products create and the outcomes. And especially when you're talking about, these high priced products, say if it doesn't work, we're not going to charge you for it. And so it's this whole area of value-based agreements or contracting. So we've developed a really cool platform company called the Real Endpoints Marketplace, where we're trying to fix some of those gaps and some of those misunderstandings between payer and biotech by really going after those products and companies that can really win in a value-based contracting construct and plug them into payers that actually want to do that. So those can come, those entities can come together and agree on what an outcome might look like, and then we do all the adjudication in between.
Cooperation is the new competition, right?
I think that's how I see it, Eugene. And again, I still worry about pharma because it's disconnected. The rest of the ecosystem is cooperating now, again, for good or for bad, because and it also creates very limited incentive for disruption, right? If you're an insurance company that owns a pharmacy benefit manager, and especially you don't want to change the system anymore because you're all integrated, you own all parts of it. And so pharma is still, on the outside.
It seems, Jeff, like as I was looking, you and I did a podcast 10 years ago when Schering-Plough, like before podcasts were a thing, right? And I just looked at it online, and I think you look 10 years younger. You look 10 years younger. You seem to have more energy. And you had a lot of energy. I wasn't saying you weren't energetic. You had a lot of energy then, but you seem to really enjoying it. And what are you doing to keep yourself through this kind of? Are you isolating? Are you out and about? What are you doing?
Yeah, no, great. It's been really interesting, right? And one of my main loves is global travel. I was one of these guys like you guys that do 250,000 miles plus a year. So I have not been on a plane since last March. My last meetings were in Santa Fe, I think in February of last year. But what's been fascinating is the business has been great. We just continue to grow the access to executives. I think when you peeled it all back, and you were just in this cycle of running around, sometimes for the sake of running around. Like in January, I go to JP Morgan, and then I go to PCMA, and then I go here, and then I've got this board meeting. When you peel it all back, yesterday I spoke to the president of a large pharma company who, and you're getting this time, these hours that you never would get with executives.
Now you can spend it on Clubhouse.
Yeah, but yeah. So it, from that perspective, it's been good, and I obviously consider ourselves really lucky to be able to have a business that you could sustain through all this when so many others are struggling. And then really the real gift was being able to spend this time with my family. I haven't been a very good father or husband over the past 25 years, and so having everybody home and being able to say it's just precious time. I don't think they would say that at all. I mean, they just look at me like, when is this guy gonna
I'm sure they appreciate it. Come
awesome.
on.
That's great.
So I'm the party pooper here.
We did our time, but thanks, Jeff. That was awesome. You got me energized. This is largely, I think we say it every week, this is largely a self-help group for me and you, Gene.
I love it. You guys have had great people. You ask, it's always interesting to see how people are, and even how you guys are getting through this. I think somebody was telling me yesterday, just sharing, even in these Zoom calls, sharing how everybody's handled it and how it's impacted people. As I also think peeled back like a layer of formality that people had between one another. I find it fascinating to look at people's backgrounds. My daughter gets so mad when I pin somebody on a Zoom just to see their bookshelves and things that are going on. But I think it's in some ways brought people. That being said, I'm very much
That's my background. My background.
Love
Awesome.
that, but would much rather be seeing you guys in person over tapas in Barcelona or Guinness and Ireland.
It will come, Jeff. It will come.
Okay, very good.
I'm sure.
Well, thank you so much,
Well,
Jeff.
listen, thank you so much for making the time. And for our viewers and listeners, hit that subscribe button because we do want to surpass Jason Calacanis at least and team. And, that's it.
I want to get my Nielsen rating report after this.
Exactly.